Johnny has been performing admirably. Ensure that you attend. I feel so much more at peace when we pray together. Joanie Lamb withheld the complete truth about the rumors, the scandal, and the for years, keeping her cards close to her chest. There is a lot of stress surrounding her name. However, all of that changed only a few moments ago. She shocked everyone with her one unexpected statement, and now everyone is talking about it online. Was it an admission, a caution, or an ultimate farewell? In any case, it's illuminating the screen and ripping open the story's truth that we've just touched on so far. Just like each other episode, it began. With the normal serene expression on her face, Joanie Lamb sat in her customary chair as the lights went on and the theme music began to play. People were expecting. Provides solace, motivation, and the customary inspirational message that Dyer had conveyed for many years. Minutes into the show, though, it became apparent that this was no ordinary broadcast. There was a noticeable change. Despite being steady, her voice often didn't carry this much weight. She finally spoke it, her jaw clenched and her eyes drooping. It was more important how she stated it than what she actually said. It seemed to have fallen out of thin air. It was understated. Many people first dismissed it as an odd sentence. It wasn't, albeit it could have been a metaphor or a phrase taken out of context. With purpose, Joni had spoken. Her message took everyone by surprise, and she stared at the camera with an odd composure. The web went boom in a matter of seconds. Moments later, footage of the incident went viral online. All directions were filled with reactions. It was shocking, not surprised, that many felt. Disoriented church groups messaged one another. Leaders of Bible studies took a brief break to play the video. During Sunday morning, pastors were questioned over it. No matter what anyone took Joni's remarks to imply, they shook something fundamental. She had represented stability for many years. That feeling of security had just been shaken. The subsequent deafening quiet only served to heighten the tension. All we got was a clip that kept playing and conjecture that got louder by the day, with no official explanation or follow-up episode to set the record straight. Some thought she was about to admit guilt. Some people mistook it for a plea for assistance. Some people thought she was blaming a friend or family member. However, there was consensus on this point. After that fateful night, everything would change. Rapid changes were taking on behind the scenes. Reportedly, employees became anxious. Emergency meetings were said to have taken place. An early departure from set was seen by one crew member. Veterans who had volunteered with Dyer for many years began to withdraw. It resembled it. A tempest was brewing offshore. With this broadcast, the first lightning bolt was broken. Voters started to part ways. Many were quick to support Joni, claiming that by finally revealing herself, she was doing the right thing. Some people felt tricked, as if, suddenly, a sacred item had been shattered. Ministries that had been Dyer's closest allies for a long time broke their silence. Invited speakers delivered captivating talks. Donors started to ask challenging questions. And Joni said nothing the entire time. That being silent became a message in and of itself. Individuals stuffed with theories, uncertainties, and profound disappointment to fill this emptiness. It was like someone had betrayed their faith in her after all those years of faithful observation. The longer it went without an answer, the more trust started to crumble. In hindsight, many claimed to have sensed it was coming. Something had shifted in the vibe on set. Joni had grown emotionally detached and impersonal. Speculation circulated over potential changes in leadership, the potential rise of Rachel Lamb, and the possible misuse of funds. However, this broadcast, this very second, that tore the curtain in two. The reaction was swift and strong. Workers who had left started speaking out under pseudonyms. The culture behind the scenes didn't reflect the polished picture on screen, according to some, and things had been amiss for a long time. People who dared to dispute decisions were subtly ousted, according to others. Amidst it all, there was that one broadcast, a seemingly insignificant moment that would later be recognized as the catalyst for everything. When, for better or worse, Joanie Lamb shattered the reputation that had been carefully cultivated over the course of many years. Some saw it as the first step toward the truth eventually emerging. Some felt they could never get over the profound betrayal. It was a watershed moment. At that very moment, many people's childhood ministries began to feel very different. And that was the end of an era for a lot of people. Instead of going out with a roar, a subtle and unanticipated storm was unleashed by a few thoughtfully chosen words. But behind the scenes, a very different story was unfolding, even though Joanie Lamb maintained smiling for the cameras. There was more to the story than the serene, professional portrayal that spectators watched on film. Actually, the Daystar Ministry's inner circle started to sense tensions rising well before. Indeed, did the whole population. A far different picture emerges when you speak to more people who were there, including employees, volunteers, and even previous guests. It was spread out over time. It began subtly, with a shift in attitude and a new way of making judgments. Everything changed after Marcus Lamb died. Naturally, many anticipated sadness. Things were going to be tough, they thought. The unexpectedly frigid weather at Dyer was the real shock. What had felt like a tight-knit family now felt more like a business, where not everyone was welcome. The long-term employees who spoke about the vibe there said it was anxious and unpredictable. People have lost any sense of trust in one another. Previously, meetings would encompass. Open discussions morphed into regulated one-way briefings. Some long-term workers were subtly transferred. Nothing noteworthy has happened. I am simply leaving. The next thing you knew, there were whispered phone calls, murmurs, and chats in the halls. Strands of text. Observations of trends began to emerge. No longer was Joni's daughter Rachel Lamb Brown merely a helpful relative. Her ascension to power was rapid. She was deliberating on significant programming selections, regarding personnel, down to the question of who could and could not appear on camera. Her assertiveness was praised by some. Even if some thought she was being utilized, the outcome remained unchanged. Something changed, and it wasn't for the better. A kind volunteer summed it very nicely. There was a time when sense of calling. Branding has set in. Some said that Joni stopped listening to advice, that she only ever spent time with individuals who agreed with her, and that anyone who disagreed with her or wanted more information was either ignored or kicked out. Things were so awkward even with the devotional sessions and daily prayer circles that used to bring the team closer together. What they said was closely observed. Worst-case scenario, someone else did it again. Additionally, no one took their places when individuals started to depart. There were instances where not even a message. Viewers would just observe the absence of familiar faces and question the reason behind it. Conflict arose over money as well. Donations were still coming in at a high volume, but many were starting to wonder where the money was going. Rumors circulated regarding opulent vacations, frivolous spending on clothing, and attending private parties that had nothing bearing on service. Instead of receiving answers, a handful of courageous individuals were let go for voicing their concerns to leadership. The public's perception of Joni was also becoming an increasingly pressing issue. The spectators continued to perceive the lady as calm and powerful. Spoke of optimism, the individuals present inside perceived something different. A leader who is feeling the heat. Protecting her daughter is the mother's top priority. After Joni wedded to Doug Weiss, the widow may be clinging to the little power she still had. It made me feel even more uneasy. In his own right, Doug caused controversy as his detractors questioned his motives and background. He started popping up in promotional materials, company meetings, and offering his ideas out of the blue. Several people said he was encouraging. Some claimed that he was interfering. Once again, though, no one was to openly challenge it. Friendships started to crumble as tensions grew. Employees who had worked together for many years ceased communicating. As they slipped away, some were forcefully prodded. And Joni said nothing the whole time. Posts on social media with poems and grins, no statements, no clarification. Members of the previous workforce began to use pseudonyms. Many reached out to journalists via email. These were hardly outlandish conspiracies, those stories. The observations were straightforward and provided a clear picture. Dyer was in a state of disarray. It became increasingly clear that there was a serious spiritual and/or leadership crisis as the conversation progressed. According to a former producer, we weren't doing ministry anymore. We were protecting an image, and that image was becoming harder and harder to keep together. The situation was further exacerbated by Joni's decision to remain silent over Marcus last month. Those who had been faithful for decades began to seek out alternatives. Separate ministries, distinct perspectives, and spaces where they were acknowledged and valued. The release of Joni's now infamous podcast interview caused the pressure behind the scenes to reach a boiling point. It was unanticipated. Everyone was captivated by it, taken by surprise, and although several in the building agreed with her, others were enraged. There were gatherings, some individuals left, some sobbed quietly, and then the aftermath. People began to stop subscribing. The guest pastors have decided not to show up. Donations ceased from backers. The network continued to air, but it seemed like something was missing. What was once alive, united, and motivated by faith has turned frigid, fractured, and secretive. Most of the departing employees weren't furious, which is the worst part. Heartache was the reason they departed. Their devotion, effort, and time had been sacrificed. Likewise, they had a sense of betrayal. Behind the scenes, Dyer had lost her luster as a symbol of faith. A lot of tension and power conflicts were going on there, with subtle suffering. Moreover, the studio lights being as brilliant as they were, the shadows behind the camera continued to lengthen. The true action started as soon as the Daystar studio lights went off and the camera stopped recording. Beneath the polished broadcasts, beneath Joni's meticulously practiced speeches and her characteristic grin, chaos reigned. A subtle type of mayhem was beginning to unfold. There were rumblings in the halls, anxiety in the staff meetings, and an undeniable sense that something major was going to break. Gradually, it began. Dyer employees with several years of service first became aware of the change. Everything around us shifted. Collaborative meetings suddenly felt distant. Previously freely shared ideas were now guarded. Instead, out of fear of saying something inappropriate, people were very careful with their words. At all times, Joni had been a formidable leader, but her unsettling hold on the ministry became much more pronounced following Marcus's death. Instead of guidance, it felt like control. The interview was the next step. It wasn't a church service that went live or a big network show. The podcast was unassuming, tiny, and unassuming, of which the majority would have chosen to disregard. Joni, however, turned up. She was alone with a few of microphones. There was no public relations staff, no fancy graphics, and no major announcements. For a while there, it seemed like any other talk. She spoke about perseverance in the face of adversity, faith, and loss. The going gets tough. The audience became comfortable, anticipating yet another reassuring speech from Joni. However, things changed at the midpoint. Her demeanor abruptly altered, her body language straightened, and her words caused everyone to halt in their tracks. "Someone's were close to Marcus and weren't watching out for him," she said with great care. No one on the hosts had any idea what to say. As soon as Joni heard the room's eerie quiet, she tore down the veneer. It had been a long time coming. Clean and orderly. Joni persevered with dignity and fortitude after Marcus's unanticipated death from COVID complications. That's the consensus among the public. They were informed of that. Now, though, Joni was dropping hints about something more sinister and agonizing. The possibility that Marcus's loved ones hadn't done enough to save him, rather than that he had merely died. Her remarks were promptly analyzed by many. Was the crew the ones she was referring to? Had Rachel been mentioned? Was this referring to Doug Weiss, the man she wed soon after Marcus passed away? There was confusion because Joni remained mum. She did nothing as the remarks lingered, unfiltered and incisive. A lit match thrown into a room full of gasoline was the best way to describe it. A bomb went off in the Christian media universe. Flowed in. People who weren't fans before came back for that one scene. Suddenly, Dyer's long-supporting church community went silent. Those who had stayed faithful began to doubt everything. What more might Joni have been concealing if she had? Where had she gone? Subtly removed from the site only 2 days later was the podcast episode. Unprompted, unclarified. No one on the show ever mentioned it. Joni remained silent about it thereafter. It was irrelevant by that point. All throughout the web, people were sharing, saving, and reposting the video. It could not be retracted. Possibly it was the whole idea. This might have been Joni's way of saying it while she was still able. Dyer was still under her power to a certain extent, although the effects were felt very away. No staff members were instructed to provide comments. Urgent gatherings were convened. A few workers quit. Some lingered, but they ceased to speak. Suddenly, Rachel's television appearances diminished. She didn't appear as self-assured when she finally showed up. Unprecedented hesitancy and strain were visible in her gaze. Doug Weiss was also conspicuously absent. He had disappeared from Joni's broadcasts and social media updates. People were asking inquiries, but no explanations were given. Was there existing tension in the marriage? Were they trying to shield him? Or was he even partially to blame for Joni's breakdown? The interview's most striking feature wasn't not just the substance but also its presentation. Nothing made Joni weep. She remained silent. She displayed no victim mentality. She simply spoke as if she had had enough of acting. People might have been most frightened by that, since if she had been dishonest previously, but now she was stating the truth. Additional accounts began to surface. Letters written by anonymous individuals, statements made by former workers, views and interpretations of archived Dyer broadcast video. The public began to take note. Minor details. A few instances when Marcus appeared uneasy. Every detail was being scrutinized as Joni evaded specific inquiries and Rachel appeared unduly contorted. Throughout it all, Joanie Lamb remained a constant. At one point representing was a bastion of stability and strength, is today the target of distrust and perplexity. There was no turning back the clock once her remarks had opened a door. The government retreated. Invited speakers delivered captivating talks. People stopped watching. And it wasn't out of faith that the remaining ones remained. Curiosity drove them to observe. The interview that revealed the truth unsettled more than just Dyer. It revealed a considerably larger truth. A ministry founded on public perception. Trying to keep it up. Regardless of her intentions, Joni had become the one to ignite the fire. Its effects are far from over. The inquiries persist. Things have gotten even worse after Joni remained silent after the interview. Because trust doesn't break with a bang. Gradually, it falls apart. The sound of that collapse is resonating in homes, churches, and hearts all throughout the world right now. For a while, Dyer experienced a sense of vitality, community, and enthusiasm. It was all sincere once. Joni and Marcus Lamb's words, the music, and the testimony were more than mere broadcasts. A sense of belonging to something greater and more significant washed over them. The feeling that something has been gradually taken from the ministry, leaving a polished exterior and an increasing sense of emptiness, as if something holy has been siphoned out. Nothing happened in a single day. A gradual, subdued change occurred. Small changes were the first ways viewers noticed the difference. A beloved host. The person speaking vanished. A well-liked part was subtly eliminated. Joni began to communicate in a different tone. Minimal emotion, maximum prose. The grins persisted. There was still light from the stage, but I sensed an unsettling presence behind the eyes. Longtime viewers saw a change even if they couldn't describe it. Nothing happened after that. There was a moment when everything was rocked. On air, Joanie Lamb revealed something that astonished the entire audience. Its significance, more than its amount, was explosive. Betrayal was hinted at by her. Those who had failed to protect Marcus were the ones she mentioned. Very imprecise. Though cautious, it was sufficient. A level that would rock the daystar crowd to their core. Quite enough to get folks to sit up and question the reality. Beyond it, however, there was utter silence. Missing follow-up. Missing interview questions, no room for explanation. Utter stillness. Posts featuring Joni smiling, Bible quotes, and written messages were back on the agenda. The viewers, however, were no longer content. The growing stillness was more noticeable than any words she had uttered. And in that stillness, The darkness began to lengthen. Things weren't running as smoothly as they seemed behind the scenes. Screeching began to be heard from the past. Rumors started spreading. Joni allegedly surrounded herself with yes individuals. Decisions were being made in secret, and Rachel Lamb Brown was reportedly running more than. Did anybody notice? Those volunteers who were once considered family now feel neglected. Anyone on staff who dared to raise an objection was either told to shut up or fired. Next, there was the matter of finances. People began to wonder where their donations were going, even if they were still pouring in. Projects that were promised were covertly put on hold. Unannounced, expansion plans vanished. There were rumors that funds were going into personal getaways, high-end clothing, and vacations that had little to do with the ministry's stated goals. Those who inquired a great deal. Inquiries ended up being frozen. Something about all of this made many feel uneasy. Ministries that had previously worked with Dyer started to distance themselves. Sermons were no longer broadcast by churches. The Lambs were no longer brought up by prominent preachers. Former backers even went silent on social media. A few of them began to unsubscribe. For others, the opportunity to air their grievances in a public forum was a lifesaver. There was opportunity for supposition due to Joni's quiet. The moment it began, there was no turning back. There was no improvement inside the Lamb family. The people no longer noticed Jonathan and Susie. There were no grand departures, only low-key disappearances. Those that followed the family's lead were left in the dark as to why. Intimately realized that a rift had occurred. Trusted figure Jimmy Evans later hinted at serious control problems. He inferred that Joni wanted Jonathan to blindly obey her. Not merely as a son, but as though she were speaking on behalf of God. It shocked a lot of people. The fact that Joni acknowledged in a podcast interview that Marcus had been in the company of individuals who failed to safeguard him just served to fan the flames. It was never mentioned by her. Despite everything, she remained composed. She was evasive. However, years of suppressed mistrust were finally shattered by the impact of her remarks. She should have acted sooner if she had suspected something was amiss. Now is not the time to tell it. And to whom was she genuinely referring? Her newlywed husband, Doug Weiss, vanished from view. Shortly thereafter. Even while Rachel's influence grew, her self-assurance appeared to be eroded. Although the set appeared identical, the vibe was distinct. Those who had invested time, money, and faith in Dyer, longtime viewers, felt abandoned, and the message seemed disjointed. Neither by Joni nor by anybody else in the ministry. I could hardly stand the stillness. There is an absence of both language and truth. Appropriate responses weren't necessary. They required candor, but they were receiving none. Smirks, scripture, and pretend were what they received instead. Concealed gatherings took place. Guests arrived and departed. No one responded to my emails. Dyer continued broadcasting despite ignoring phone calls.